Hey guys, welcome back. Conversations, fitness, wellness, and longevity. I'm Sean LeFloch, and I'm with Scott Hagnas. Um, Scott was actually just mentioning that he was just off on a bit of a trip, and he has his glasses off. Scott, why don't you elaborate a little bit?
Well, I have so I've been mostly nearsighted, astigmatism since I was about 14, and eyesight just went downhill. And then so I've always worn glasses, but I've noticed in the past few years that if I'm outside, particularly in the bright sunlight, take my glasses off, I can actually see better. And I can't see perfectly, but much better than I'd expect. And the longer I sit there and try, the better my eyes start to focus.
Mm.
Um, so I've always been really curious about trying to retrain my eyes to focus properly. It's just one of those things I haven't had time to research and figure out how to do, but interesting possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that when I was going through a my posture restoration kind of deal, um, they put me through a field of vision test, and right away they basically just what that is they take a popsicle stick, they have you lie on your back. The stick is about a foot away from your face, and they have you come on down, and then they tell you when it's over your eyes, stop. So I had them do it, and this was a PRI certified technician, and all of a sudden, stop, and this is where it was, and it was like actually it was from the bottom, and I comes up and I go,
Huh.
okay, stop, and then it was like here. So when I did it, I was like, okay. And he's like, what does that mean? He goes, well, if your horizon is here, you're going to be constantly thinking that this has to be the horizon. So you're going to constantly be in this, I'm walking uphill, or excuse me, walking downhill because you're pulling the horizon up. So your posture is going to compensate for that. So you're always going to be walking downhill. And to stop walking downhill, you'll naturally lean back. So you're going to be in a constant extension moment. So they were like, "Well," I'm like, "What do I do?" They're like, "Well, you need to work with some prism glasses and that's some exercises, and that's pretty much it." So I went to an optometrist who actually specialized in posture, and she set me up with some prism glasses, and I had to come in periodically to work with a therapist to kind of work on some exercises, and then I would go home and do it. But they put me through a whole like battery of tests to see what my field of vision looks like. I mean, it was like 2 or 3 sessions. It was a pretty penny, but um, it definitely like it showed some things that I never was aware of, but I had some underlying issues with. The only time I really knew that this was happening in terms of my field of vision, I had a cognizant kind of way of telling, okay, this doesn't work, this works, was actually when I was 24 years old, I went and got my concealed weapons permit. And when you do that, you have to fire a gun. And when I did that, I had a target about 10 to 15 feet away, and I didn't come close to hitting this thing. I'm like, I do great in the video games, but I had no way of lining up my eyes with the target because when you have this what's called it's a shift, midline shift, you are now have no depth perception versus also your right and left do not converge on the same point. So it took a little while to do it, but once I was able to focus, and it's not one of those things where you have to actually have surgery or anything like that. It's just you have to retrain the brain and the muscles to work properly, and all of a sudden you converge in a point, and your muscle and the muscles of your eyes and your eyes actually work together. And when you converge in a point, you can focus. So it's actually an amazing thing that we think that just throw some glasses on, or oh, this is just the way it is. But I mean, you are proof in the pudding. You just take them off, and you just kind of take some time to focus a little bit, obviously, and you can make some significant changes, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's a really interesting story. I've actually been curious to hear more about it. You're working with the prism glasses and retraining that a little bit. And I'd highly suspect I have some things and some wacky things because I was have my right eye socket was crushed and I have a fake eye socket.
Mm.
And so from a car wreck years ago, and this eye is always angled down, so I have a slightly different field of vision.
Wow.
Um, so I had to deal with fixing that kind of double vision on my own years ago, uh,
Mm.
which I was largely able to do, but it leaves this one quadrant down to the right side that things still don't line up, except it's more natural to just turn and look down anyway, so it's really a
Exactly.
non-issue. I
Yeah.
don't notice it at all.
Yeah, one way of actually telling, they said, like, if you have somebody watch you read, so if you read a page left to right, your eyes are supposed to track. And then when you get to the end, you turn your eyes and you do it again. For people who have midline shifts or have some kind of vision issues, what they'll do is they'll use their head to compensate. So all of a sudden they do this, and then they look back at this side of the page because they don't want to do that and turn their eyes to that point. So what it does is it actually causes people to not be able to focus on lines because your head is constantly moving and you're having to line things up, and in turn that could as they say, make it so that some people are not wanting to read just because they're frustrated. It kind of takes the wind out of their sails, so to speak, because they're not able to do it proficiently. Whereas if they practice moving their eyes properly and in the correct ways and converging onto targets, reading actually can become a lot more enjoyable. And I remember when I was in the thick of my training, I sat down one day and I just started reading, and I read out loud, and it was like flowed beautifully relative to what I had before. I was like, wow, just a kind of awareness thing of like, I really never had that before, where I can just go from line to line to line to line and just kind of trace my steps. And it was, again, another aha moment in this whole ball of like, what the hell is wrong with me?
There's so many layers to the onion.
Yeah, I think that's,
So with the prism glasses, then for you were more like a very similar to a breathing reset drill. You would wear them for a certain amount of time, or would you actually use them all the time for a while?
well, they gave me two options. You can use prism glasses to shift your midline, and then you just wear them all the time, or you can use them with a higher degree of, I think it's I forget what it was called, diopic, or it's a way of them creating prism. It was like a +2, so they were very shifted. So when I took my glasses off, the midline came back down to here. When I had them on, it was way up here. So they kind of make a super compensation so that when you actually put them on and you have to focus on that kind of stuff, it's resistance, so to speak. It makes it much more difficult for
Yeah.
you to move. So it's about a 20 minutes a day. I was doing it for about 3 or 4 times a week. They tell you like 20 minutes 5 times a week, and there's like no way that anybody's ever going to do that. So I think they kind of roll that into their
Yeah.
protocols, that it ends up averaging out to 2 to 3 times. So I did 20 minutes. It was like 3 different exercises, and then I did actually balancing on one foot with the glasses on for a prolonged amount of time, and I would increase that over time. So like the first week I did 2 minutes, the second week I did 3 minutes, and literally just standing there and just kind of balancing. And you'll be surprised at how difficult it is to balance when you can't really use your vision. You have to use your vision and you have to focus on points. But I also would train with them as well, because they told you to run and do that kind of stuff. And it definitely profoundly made a difference in terms of my balance. But I think after a certain amount of time, once I did have a kind of a leveling off of my midline shift, they were almost like too much of a shift for me. So now I was almost overcompensating, and I was dealing with a little bit of issues there once I kept putting them on. And then once I kind of took them off, I really didn't have too many of the lower back issues that I was kind of flaring up, that once I did
I
have that.
lost you there.
Yeah. Let me,
Very.
yeah, I'm kind of coming in and out a little bit. Can you hear me there, Scott?
Yeah, you're good
Okay,
right now.
cool. So yeah, so like once I got my midline shift kind of at a point where it was not affecting me, I basically took the glasses off and then kind of didn't go back. But it's interesting, if I did put the glasses on back on and test some of the things that I had done before, I'm interested to see if they've kind of gone back into out of whack. But I did an assessment about, I think, 8 weeks or 12 weeks after I had started the glasses, and they retested, or like flying colors. Like the only thing that you have a real like you would have any significant problem with, it was very, very close to you. You have a problem converging that close. But I'm like, honestly, it's not that big of a deal. So I was like, all right, the cost to benefit ratio here is just like, all right, I'm just gonna kind of go back with my training and that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any resources for anybody that might be interested in exploring this sort of thing?
Yeah, actually, there's a paper written by a PRI specialist I was working with. His name is Jason Roby. I'll put that in the description below. He was working with one of his baseball players at the University of Miami. In Miami, they went through the entire protocol through postural restoration. and they found that at a certain level, you do like the baseline stuff, and you increase the degree of specialty, then you increase the degree of specialty, and then it gets to a point where you either have to look at some neurological things like vision, and then there's another one with your jaw alignment as well and your teeth. But the vision one was just boom. That was it. It was like so simple. It was popsicle stick. Literally, you go from the top down, perfect. You go from the bottom up. It was here. I was like, oh, that's over my eyes, and they were like not even close. So I had like about a 2-inch shift in field of vision. But the resource in terms of figuring that out, if you go to Postural Restoration Institute, you go to that website. They have some articles on it. And then if you see a PRI specialist, most likely they're going to kind of outsource you to either an ophthalmologist or an optician that will be able to work with prism. There's only like certain doctors who work with prisms. Luckily, the University of Miami had one, and then there was one locally in my area that was like basically down the street for me. It's a bit pricey because you have to get classes and stuff. And I've never done that before, and it depends on the type of insurance you have. If you have some decent insurance, they'll be able to get you in for at least the visual assessment, and then any of the stuff on top of that, you might have to play a little bit out of pocket. But overall, I think it was worth it to have an understanding as a coach. But in terms of the benefits, I think there was some significant benefit to it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. So another kind of interesting thing that sort of came out of this 4-day trip my wife and I just took, we're both very busy people, each run our own businesses, et cetera. And it was just trying to take some time to shut down, and just in conversations, talking about how just as a culture, we don't really give ourselves permission to kind of shut down. Interesting observation we're thinking of is, if you're sitting by the pool, let's say someone calls you, wants something, and you say, oh, I'm sitting by the pool, people will tend to respect that because they recognize that as rest. But if you were to say something to the effect of, oh, I'm just sitting outside taking a break and, watching the trees, they're going to hit you up with whatever it is they were wanting to do.
That doesn't sound important.
Yeah, exactly right. But I just kind of thought that was kind of interesting and kind of unfortunate, and that we don't have a lot of like culturally acceptable things where we can kind of balance out the hard work with the recovery we need necessarily.
I'm on the completely same page as you there, Scott. You don't know until you know with some of those things, and it takes a lot of self-awareness to kind of go through some of those things. I'm actually reading a book right now. It's called Frame Shift. It's by a UK author that I don't even think it's available in the United States. I found it through a book club, and it's one of the ways that society kind of causes us or manipulates us is by framing things in a certain way. So just like you said, if you are laying by the pool, all of a sudden it's kind of a leisure activity. Like, oh, you're taking time to rest, or you're being lazy. Maybe even some would say, oh, you're not using your time wisely. So it's the frame in which we put things that allows us to understand what we're actually doing. And the book that I'm reading right now is allowing you to kind of understand how and why people use framing, and how we can actually change people on the whole. And I think one of the ways that we can change is obviously, and this is something Gandhi said, the change comes from within. We're not going to be able to change somebody because they're too attached to their outlook and they don't want to change. They're set in their ways, and they think that if they give this up, that's it, their life is going to end. And the way that we are able to create change is by showing them through our own actions that you can have balance, you can have happiness, but you don't have to hold on to all this stuff. And people don't trust it until they see it with their own two eyes. And we're seeing, I think, a complete paradigm shift in society today, that there's so many more people are having this balance between being a contribution to society, but not necessarily having it being a burden over the top of them.
Mm. Yeah, that would be kind of a welcome change, and it's a difficult lesson, to embrace sometimes and put into practice. Maybe, I think a lot of people recognize the need, but are they actually able to do it?
Yeah,
and some of that comes back down to like what's inside of you and what's driving you.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's I do believe that there's two chief motivating factors for people. There's fear and there's love, and they're two sides of the same coin. So it's like there's no right or wrong answer here. But if you're motivated by fear, you're in lack. You're like, well, if I give this up, then I'm not complete. But people who really are with themselves aware and they have this self love is they understand that they're endless in terms of what they can give. So it doesn't matter if they lose their job. It doesn't matter if someone upsets them. They have a deep understanding within themselves that everything in the end is going to work out. But it's a very hard thing to do because everybody and society in general pushes us toward needing things on the external. And when you need things on the external, it keeps you being a consumer. Just think, in society today, it's very difficult to live off the grid. We're all in debt. You have to go to school and then you're in debt again. If you're try to find a place, you have to pay taxes. So it makes it so it's very difficult for a person to just basically unplug and live off the grid. There's a great show. It's called The Last Alaskans. That's I think it's on Discovery or something like that.
Oh yeah.
There's a plot of land up in Alaska where like I think 6 different families are allowed to kind of live out their child's lives there, and then that's it. They're closing off this preserve to people, but they're literally 300 miles from the nearest road. And I look at this show and am is simultaneously scared and intrigued at the same time because like it's just like in your mind you're like imagine you just went out and you did that and you're like that would be scary. That scares the
Yeah.
crap out of me because I'm like then when am I? But that's the point. Like you are who you are, regardless if you are out there or you're sitting here with your computer and your car and your job. You're still that person. It's just that we perceive that you're all this other stuff too, and it kind of throws us off. So, like, if the world ends tomorrow and we don't have all this shit in front of us, we are still those people out in the wilderness living our lives. But it's an
Mm-hmm.
amazing, it's such a cool little show, and I definitely would recommend it to anybody because it's just kind of an interviewing them as they're doing their daily stuff. And there's not very much scripted things, I don't think, not like, the dramatizations that
Like
you
some
see
of
and
them.
all this other stuff and nonsense. It's just them living their lives out in the bush. And a lot of it's boring. It's like my cabin flooded. Now I got to clean it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Real life stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
Not.
exactly. But
No.
it makes it so much more of a intriguing because like
Mm-hmm.
that's your big thing for this week is that your cabin flooded. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
not your girlfriend left you or you're missing a mortgage payment or whatever. It's like you don't have food this week because you couldn't catch a caribou or something like that. And then when you
Yeah.
think about it, you're like, those are some real life problems, not what I have.
Yeah. That's some serious. Yeah.
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 So
I've seen promos for that, but I'll
yeah.
have to actually try
Yeah.
and catch
Take a look. I mean,
it
it's
some.
my little bit of guilty pleasure, but it also kind of reconnects myself and it allows me to kind of understand like what's important and what's not important. But I know that you were in the outdoors for 4 days. Did you feel any kind of shift in your connection to yourself? But also, one of the other things is, were you on a clock at all? Like, did you have your watch handy at all, or one of the things that I kind of heard was that if you stay in the wilderness for a prolonged amount of time, you have a bit of a circadian shift where you kind of wake and sleep a little bit differently. Any of those kind of things?
Yeah, so I wasn't like completely out in the woods. We had a kind of a cabin,
Cool.
that we stayed in, and it was in a community, but not really around anything. But the
Yeah.
nice thing is we weren't operating on any kind of a clock, no
Yeah.
wake up, no baby or dog to wake us up at any certain time, and no
Yep.
real agenda on any of the days either,
Yeah.
which is really, really nice. Now, I can say though that I have coming from a family of hunters, and that was pretty much what our family vacations were. My whole life was going hunting pretty deep in the woods. Um, that will happen definitely to some degree. You kind of just live with the light and the dark cycles, and it's amazing how sleepy and ready for bed you'll be when the sun's going down at 7 p.m. or whatever it is, where that would not normally ever happen.
Yeah.
At home in the lighted environment with everything going on.
Yeah. That's definitely it's amazing. And again, it's one of those egoic things where you're like, man, that would be terrible. I would not want to do that. And then you're there and you have a choice and you're like, this is great. Like I love every minute of this.
Yeah, it's really refreshing, and
A good word for
being
it.
kind of a geek for tracking all kinds of things.
Mm.
It's always interesting, like how reaction rate and tap test scores and things just go through the roof when you take a few down days like that and actually
Yeah.
sleep as much as your body really wants.
Yeah.
You can really see how important like 10 plus hours sleep would be to athletes, especially in any really high skill sport.
Yeah. Where there's a lot of psychological demand and CNS demand on an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily just grunt work on that kind of stuff, but um,
Yeah.
yeah, when I actually I started doing I think I mentioned this the first time we had spoke, but when I went off I did a walk from Jacksonville to Miami. It was about 360 miles, so I was doing about 20 miles a day. I would start my walks pretty much with the sun up. So this was in March, so the sun was coming up at about 7 ish. So I was up like that time walking. So I would pretty much get up, grab something to eat, and literally I'd be out walking, south obviously for about 20 miles, and it would my day would end at about 3:45 ish. So in March in this area, the sunset's probably about 5:30, 6 o'clock. So pretty much by the time I got settled in and got dinner, like I was ready to go. Like 7, 8 o'clock, the sun would go down and I'd be ready to go to sleep, and it felt great. And then some days I would be like, oh, wow, I have to write a blog post or I'd have to email some people back, whatever. And I'd stay up late, and I would definitely feel the difference of those days where I wasn't listening to what my body was telling me. And I was just like, I'm setting myself up for failure when I just don't listen to actually what I really like want to do physically right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's definitely something very important too, just about the act of being outdoors for that long.
Yeah.
That I know that it's research based as well. That you get much better hormonal profile in the evening if you've had significant light exposure, real light exposure,
Yeah.
outdoor light.
Yeah.
That's something I've always noticed is being tired by evening after being outside all day, even
Mm.
if you are kind of in a home environment. So if you've been out on a weekend, let's say.
Yeah, yeah. I remember reading something actually recently. I'll put the link in. It was an article about why you feel sleepy after going to the beach, and it kind of goes right in hand with what you were talking about, and just being outdoors in general. You have this, such a nice release of hormones, and then by the evening you're just completely anything that's going to allow that to happen. You could pretty much go to the bank with that. I mean, in my experience, like whether it's going to the
Yeah.
beach or you're going out hiking or whatever, and you feel like tuckered out by the end of the day in a good way, not like mentally exhausted, like you just beat your head
Right.
against the wall. And the difference, especially if you train, like one of those training days where you're like, I went way too hard and you can't sleep. You're stressed out to the max.
Yeah.
And then you go for a walk for like 6 hours hiking, and you get back and you just kick up your heels and you just fall asleep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 There's a clear difference. It's the good kind of tiredness.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a part of the mixture of what I think wellness is and longevity is in general is finding a balance between understanding what a day's work really is. Are you praying for sleep, or are you glad you can go to sleep tonight because it allows you to wake up tomorrow morning and feel fresh? Like, I know for me, a lot of times when I'm stressed out with work and all this other kind of stuff, I'm like, man, I wish I could just go to sleep. And then boom, I don't go to sleep. It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
it's clockwork. It's completely that way, where it's like when you have a fulfilling day and you're just in flow, you hit the head on your pillow and you're not even thinking about anything. You're just like, man, this is just beautiful. And then you just fall asleep and you wake up and you feel great.
Yeah.
So I definitely would be aware, of those kinds of things and what kind of triggers those have. And it's okay to have some of those triggers that are, that might be not beneficial to your life. And you might want to reassess what those things are about you, or you might reassess what that stimulus is. Are you overly stressed from that thing that innately shouldn't be anything? Like, I'm really upset that the laundry detergent that my wife got wasn't the right detergent and it keeps me up all night. I'm like, well, is that the biggest problem in the world? Can you accept that it's just something so innate and something so
Right.
simple? You know what I mean? So there's balance involved, I think, on this whole thing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another way to kind of come at it too, removal of some of those things, but just an effort to get outside, maybe on lunch break. I know lots of
Yeah.
people don't necessarily have the flexibility to get outside all that often, but I think a short walk at lunchtime or whatever that means is super helpful. It doesn't take a ton of exposure to kind of get some of the benefits of that bright light. But if you're
100%.
inside all day, outside, and maybe hopping in and out of your car,
Yeah.
that could be a problem.
Obviously, for the geeks out there, what would be like a decent amount of time in the sun that you've recommended for people, Scott?
Yeah, I usually go with something around a half an hour. I mean, obviously more is ideal, but that's something that I think people can figure out how to squeeze in and has a significant benefit.
Does that mean full sun exposure? Does that mean just being outside, or
Just outside. I
okay.
mean, Portland winter. I mean, there's only like a few months of the year that works for good sun
Yeah.
exposure here, and it's the brightness and the intensity of light. So you can go out in the middle of January, throw your coat on, head
And
out.
just get outside is what you're saying. So
Yeah.
you don't need a suntan in January in Portland for you to get the effects of it.
Yeah, and I'm not, because we're not talking about vitamin D, and all
Okay.
that right here necessarily. It's the light and our eyes interpreting that light and what that does inside.
Yeah.
So
I think that's awesome. Well, I think that's pretty much all for this week. Probably, I think we knocked out a good amount of stuff here.
yeah,
I think in general. I mean, I guess the take home this week is get outside and get some exposure and kind of relax a little bit. What do you think?
yeah, yep, and maybe get your eyes checked.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said before, I'll post those links in the description to get a little bit more information on the prism glasses that I've worked with. Scott, you got anything else for today?
No, I think that's all for today.
Okay, cool.
Got to run.
Yeah, exactly. I'm Sean LeFloch. You can find me at Sean at CrossFitDelraryBeach.com. Scott?
Scott at CrossFitPortland.com.
Awesome. So we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.
All right, take care.